Cashflow Diary Podcast, episode 72.
Congratulations, you showed up. Give yourself a high five in celebration of your success. Welcome to the Cashflow Diary, where new and experienced investors come to take confident action towards their goals. Your host is a family man, a real estate entrepreneur, investor, coach, and instructor. As a master facilitator of Robert Kiyosaki's Cashflow 101 game, he's inspired many to begin their journey into creating cash flow for themselves and their family. And now, here he is to offer you the tools required to earn the income desired. Your cash flow coach, Jay Massey.
All right, and welcome to another episode of the Cashflow Diary Podcast. I am Jay, your host, and I'm so glad that you have decided to tune in one more time. Are you starting to look forward to these? I know that we do. We look forward to meeting new entrepreneurs, finding out new information, growing, becoming bigger, better, badder business owners, because information is so freely available, and more importantly, we have access to it, and we now can learn straight from the source of exactly what we need to do to make our businesses better and grow cash flow. That's what I get excited about. As many of you know, if you're joining us for the first time, there's a free course sitting there for you at learninvestingnow.com. Learninvestingnow.com. It's just sitting there saying, hey, take me, because that way you have a shot at going out there and learning how to transact real estate using none of your own money and or credit. Now, some of you are like, you know what, that's fine, that's great. I don't have the time to learn, but I have nothing but 24 hours a day, and I would love to earn. Great. So you're going to go over to begininvestingnow.com. We've got a number of cash flowing assets sitting there waiting for you. If you want to be on the list to be notified when new assets are available, that's going to be the way to get it done. So today we're going to go where no man has gone before. No, I'm just kidding. We're going to talk a lot about the reasons you might want to be in business. One of the most important things, in fact, that comes to business is it's a skill set game. You know, I find and I have found that a number of people are working in jobs or that they don't necessarily like or want, but they're doing it because of they're missing one basic skill set. And for me, that basic skill set is the ability to generate interest and or a lead in whatever product or service you might be offering. Today's guest is an expert in that, and most importantly, and I think very interestingly, he's a graduate of the Virginia Military Institute and grew up in a military family, just like me. This is going to be fun. His father was a lieutenant general in the Army, same branch. This is getting even more interesting. And he has had family serving in the military dating back to the Revolutionary War. Now, wow. That's what you really call a dedicated military family. He served as a U.S. Army artillery officer in Germany, where I grew up, at the height of the Cold War. So I'm excited to hear what he's got to share with us about business. I'm almost willing to bet that some of the lessons that he learned while in the service and probably even at home filter into his business success today. So do me a favor and welcome Mr. Douglas Burdett. Douglas, you there?
Yeah, thanks. Good to be here.
I'm glad you could take some time to invest here with us, and we're definitely excited to be here and just find out a little bit more about who you are, what you guys are out there doing, how you're continuing to create success, not only for yourself, but also for the clients that you serve. One of the things that I always like to start off with is that I tend to view today's entrepreneurs like yesterday's superheroes. So, you know, we have all been exposed to superheroes of various kinds, be that, you know, Batman or Wonder Woman or Aquaman or the Wonder Twin Powers or Space Ace or whomever, but they all have an origin story. So, you know, somebody gets hit by radioactive waves and then suddenly they have special powers and decide to use them for good. My question to you, sir, becomes, you know, before you were, you know, Douglas Burdett, what were you doing before? What led you to be doing what you are now? What was that transformation process look like? Because, you know, we're not all just born with a cape on one day. We slowly turn our way into that. And I'd love to know a little bit about your journey and how that happened for you.
Well, I wasn't hit by kryptonite, but I can tell you that I have been hospitalized twice from concussions sustained in boxing injuries. So I think that could tell you two things. One is I'm not a very good boxer, but two, at an early age, I learned how to take a hit. And I think there's some translation into the other, the entrepreneurial world, where if you've done that and maybe played football and you've gotten knocked around quite a bit, you realize that it's not the end of the world, and you got to kind of get back on that horse and keep going. Um, in terms of my story, like I said, grew up in the military family, and I went to VMI, and then I was in the Army for 3 years. And what happened there is, as you mentioned, I come from this military family, and I think this applies to some of the entrepreneurs and people who are soon to be entrepreneurs, is that I watched my dad, probably like your dad, and being in the military was like a calling for them. It was like being a priest or a teacher, or I mean, it was their life. And I was in, and I liked it, but I didn't love it. And I think I looked at that and said, you know what? I've got to find something that just fires my passions and is something that I could see myself doing and be interested in it. So um, I got out, and I went back to school and studied business, and then went off and worked on. Well, what happened was I spent time looking at different careers that might be of interest, and I had the luxury of 2 years in getting an MBA, and I said I've got to find something that interests me. So I looked at a lot of different fields, and I was kind of scratching off the list of, should I investigate this further? Should I not? And I stumbled upon advertising through some friends that had suggested I look at it. I went to a professor and said, what's one book I could read on this so I could determine if I want to pursue it or move on to the next idea. And she gave me this book, and it was a great book, and it was called Ogilvy on Advertising. And I read it, and I said, that's it. I found it. I'm really excited about this. And so I decided I want to go work on Madison Avenue in New York and at a big agency. And I put together I was meeting an ad agency president, and he said, we haven't seen many people go from the military into advertising. And this is a lesson for your listeners probably as well, where he said, one is life and death and the other one's fun and games. And I said, well, which one's which? But I thought, if it's that much of a point of differentiation, that's going to be my point of differentiation. So I had nothing to lose. I put a picture of me in front of one of my howitzers from when I was in the Army, and I made an ad up, and it said, ready, aim, hire. And it had some funny copy and a resume on the back. And this was before the days of email and internet and or the websites. I got so many interviews. I would call places up, and I could speak to the receptionist, and they'd say, yeah, we got it. So I did something very different. I did something that sort of leveraged how my background, evidently, if that was such a differentiation. And I ended up getting a job at the oldest ad agency in the country, one of the largest in the world, J. Walter Thompson. And so I worked there, and I also worked at another big one in New York called Gray Advertising. And so I was there about 10 years. And, I loved it. I really liked it. I met the girl of my dreams, met my wife. We got married, and our son was born there. And like a lot of young families, we decided we want to get out of Manhattan. So we found out that we could both do the same thing we were doing in Virginia. And so we moved, and I worked at a firm for 4 years. And then this, again, back to kind of the decisions I had to face, where I became very unhappy. And I think that some of this may be my genetics, like yours, of having come from the military family, but also having been in the military. And my wife said, you guys, if you're not well led, you insist on taking charge. And that was exactly what happened. And so I started my own advertising agency, and it was more local clients, not the big national ones in New York. But then I, did that in traditional advertising. But then what happened was, and I hope another lesson for entrepreneurs out there, and it's also sort of tied in with getting knocked out in boxing, was along the way, the advertising world has changed, and it really started changing dramatically within the last 5 years. And it was really troubling because it was a field I still loved and liked a lot, but it was kind of going away. And I liken it to maybe a travel agent 20 years ago who's saying, this is all kind of going away. This is all changing, and there's no shortage of industries out there that have just been turned upside down by the internet and marketing, hopefully most for the good. So what I did was I said, something has to change. I've got to evolve this. And that's where I hired a consultant who was a new business expert for ad agencies. But what he did, and he started 5 or 6 years ago, is he did it all with social media. So in other words, what he did was he just started blogging and writing really useful articles for people who owned agencies or who were the business development people. And sure enough, through the magic of search terms and the internet, I found his blog. I started reading it. It was really helpful. I started to see, I could see how this is all going in the whole world is changing. The way people buy is changing. The way marketing is changing. I hired him, and he said, he spent a day with us, and what he did is he would say, the internet's disrupting everything, including our industry, and explained all that. And then the second half of the day is he would urge us to, he urges the agencies to start a blog about a particular niche of marketing that they wanted more business from. So in other words, it wasn't your ad agency website, it was a blog that would be useful for a niche. So in other words, he had a client that was in Oklahoma, an agency with a variety of local accounts, but they had a casino account or two, and they wanted more of those. So they set up a separate blog, and they started writing about casino marketing. And sure enough, it became very popular, just like his blog was for me, and they started pulling in more business. So he said, what would you like to set up a blog that specializes in? And I said, I don't know. I've worked on everything. And of course, this is a horrifying, question. It's like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I had worked on national clients like Toys R Us and Listerine, and I'd worked on local clients, the bank and the whatever. And I just said, I'm not sure, but if I have to work on one more personal injury law firm account, I will blow my brains out. So I said, but I've got, and this again is sort of about the niche. I said, I've got a lot of friends who are in the defense industry. There's a lot of them here in Virginia, and they would all say, we don't have to market ourselves, or that's what they thought. But let me ask you a question. And then they would spend 45 minutes asking me marketing questions. And I said, nobody's talking to that group. Nobody's talking to these defense contractors. So he said, there you go. If it's interesting to you, start writing about it and develop a blog that would be useful for them. So I did, and I named it Fire Support, which was a term that defense contractors would understand, meaning artillery or air support for ground war fighters on the ground. And I started writing about it and researching it and talking to a lot of people and just publishing content. And sure enough, I started attracting a growing audience and speaking gigs and clients, helping defense contractors, which is interesting because most of my business is working with business-to-business companies. So this is the long answer to your question, but it kind of brings you up to where I am, which is I have this business-to-business marketing agency, and there's a blog there, and that's going well. But then I've also got this other blog about defense contractors, and oddly enough, it's turned into a floor model for people that aren't even in the defense industry, where they say, we see what you're doing. We see how you're using content to attract the right kind of traffic to build your credibility and your thought leadership and your client base. We want one of those.
Okay, if you've ever been in any of the live events that I've done, we talk about this concept when it comes to specializing inside of your real estate. There are many different types of individuals out there, and oftentimes when we go into an investment, we just think, oh, well, we'll get anybody. And it's no different than restaurants and other retail products or just any product or service. You want to focus in on the people who you can serve, and you are uniquely gifted, each one of us, all ready to serve a person. And that's exactly what you hear him doing, which is exciting, All right, guys, I want to give you just a quick update. Still working on the audiobook. Thank you for all the testimonies you guys have been sending in. It's very, very encouraging to know that you're out there taking action, reading the book, etc., etc., etc. Don't forget, this Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific time, we still will be doing the live web show. Go over to cashflowdiary.tv, send in a question, send in a deal, and we will help you get that done. Don't really have a whole lot for you to in terms of updates, etc. right now. I do remember, though, I'll be in Phoenix in a couple of weeks. For those of you out in that area, if you want to catch up with me, let me know, and we'll see what we can do about meeting. That'd be awesome. Anyway, let's get back to the interview. I love it. It's like, yeah, can we have one of those to go with fries,
Yeah,
please?
right. And just a different color and with the cup holder. But I think if I could, the one of the messages to your audience and the entrepreneurs, and as I mentioned to you before the show out there, is believe it or not, I spend a lot of time talking clients and prospects out of wasting a lot of money on marketing. And the reason I say that is because there's still a tendency, like there's been for maybe the last 75 years, to want to go through a gatekeeper like a magazine, buy ads or beg an editor for time or, a story, or to go to every single trade show, or to publish lots of catalogs and so forth. And what we can do now, just like you said in the introduction to your show, you can go straight to people now. And now the great leveler of the internet is that if you have a niche and you blog about it and you educate your buyers and are helpful to them, you will get traffic to your site. I'm oversimplifying it a bit, but the spirit is that the more that you educate and help online for your niche, the more you're going to get. And you don't, the first thing that any company should have or do in marketing is to have a blog.
Nice.
Now, don't get distracted by anything else. And believe me, there's a lot of shiny disco balls out there that are blinding people. But it's all about creating content that's useful for your customers, and they will find you, and they will get to know, like, and trust you. And then the other thing that's funny, or it's surprising, is that there was a study by the Corporate Executive Board, and there's been others as well, that show that in a business-to-business scenario, companies now are at least 57% through their purchase before they first contact the seller.
Wow.
So they are researching you, and they're researching their options and solutions to their problems. And if you're not out there trying to be part of that first 57% of being found and providing information, if they contact you after that, it's really only about price, because they're educated by then, and they're probably educated by your competitors. Now, all the other studies show that they're like 75% or 90% through before they first contact you. And what happens is, now I'll get contacted by companies, and they know quite a bit about what we do. We don't get calls saying, what do you guys do and how do you do it, and that type of thing. They call up and say, I've been reading your blog for a year. What's your calendar look like?
Nice.
So
yeah, no, that's perfect. I love how in so many ways there were a number of things to pay attention to, not the least of which, yes, is like you said, taking a hit, but it's not taking a hit. And taking a hit is one thing, but you get back up, especially when the market shifts and changes. And it sounds like that's a lesson that you've had to learn. And I think many business owners fail to learn it in the way that they should. I call it making a pivot, because that's what the advertising, that's what you're saying, is that advertising made a pivot. The market changed, and if you didn't change with it, then you were left behind and you don't have a business anymore. And how you got customers changed, how you talk to them changed. All of these things were completely new. It becomes one of the things that I love about real estate. Yes, it was once an apartment building, but now it's a school, and maybe later it's a church, and then now it could be an assisted living facility. There are just so many ways to pivot the same piece of real estate when you need to, and this is that same principle played out again. I'm curious though. Typically, when someone of the military personnel that I know, they're not known. How do I say this? For their creativity. They're not known for being able to go out there and come up with. By the way, your ready, aim, hire. That was really good. I'm like, yeah, okay, that was good. I would want to talk to that guy too. So, where do you think that comes from? Just being able to connect in that way, either using humor or what have you, but that's clearly something you have naturally.
Well, and it's interesting you say that because at military school and occasionally in the military, that humor was a problem. Not
No doubt.
not for me, but but for my battalion commander and the upperclassmen. So, well, I think that it's something that, yeah, it's true. A lot of the guys in the military, they really tend to want to color within the lines, and there are a lot of them like that. But I think that that may be more perception than reality. And one of the things that I certainly learned in the military, although you don't have to have been in the military to figure this out, is you would be amazed at the amount of creative problem solving that you're going to get when you hire a veteran. Sure, there's a written down way of, there's an established guideline on how everything's supposed to be done in the Army. And if you can make that work, that's great. But a lot of times it doesn't. So you have to improvise a lot. I'll just give you an example. In the artillery, there's all these, mechanized vehicles and lots of, I guess all the Army has lots of that, the vehicles. But there was a parts system, and this parts system, it worked some of the time, but it wasn't as efficient as the private sector. And there was even one artillery unit in Louisiana that received a ship anchor one day. I mean, it wasn't even the right armed service. They got this ship anchor. So I had a number of non-commissioned officers and soldiers who were very creative at trading parts and getting what they needed in order to get the vehicles moving, because we had to be technically ready to go to war within two hours. And so there's just other kinds of problems. There's lots of people problems that you can try to understand, but you still have to. So I think that the military certainly prepared me for some creative problem solving, and I think that the people who want to go off and start their own business, clearly there's a sickness that we all have, and I think that there may be a little bit of an authority problem.
A little bit.
So, but we can try and channel it into good ways. But I think that a lot of people that go and start their own businesses, they just at some point think, I've either got to be in charge, or I could do a better job, or I'm not happy. But they figure out a way to kind of improvise and overcome. So there was some creativity there. I remember my commander had said he thought I was, pretty creative, but just because you're not, funny or love writing or something, there are still very, very other creative ways that I encounter people when I was in the service.
No doubt, no doubt. There was something that you said earlier that I want to circle back to, because I think it's important. You said the guy that was looking to hire you was talking about one was life or death and the other's fun and games, and I'm just curious because I feel as if both of them are really life or death. One is, yes, for the freedom and safety of a country, but the other is, for the freedom and safety of a family individually, and especially financially. I see, what we do as entrepreneurs in providing jobs or clean, safe, affordable housing or energy or food or whatever it is that we're providing in our products or services as a necessary ingredient to the activities of daily living in so many ways. I'm just kind of curious as to how you see it.
Well, I guess it reminds me of this notion I agree. It can be. It may not be life or death. It could be, but it's enormously important. And there's something that happens when people are buying something or selling something, and certainly real estate's involved. And I'm not a real estate expert, but um, when a person is buying, some in the business, when a business is selling to another business or is marketing themselves to another business, a lot of people think that it's a real rational, linear, logical process. But the fact is, it's a much more emotional journey for the buyers than I think most business to consumer purchases. In other words, if you buy a bad car or you get a bad roofing job or you buy the wrong kind of shoes, you're out that money. But it's not like it's not like you're going to lose your job or it's going to affect the livelihood of people working for you or your clients and that type of thing. And when somebody's when you're if you have a business that sells to other businesses, you've got to remember that the people that are buying it are very emotional creatures. They're concerned about the success of their own company, their own career, their ability to make money. Mm-hmm. So, and maybe a little bit off topic, but it is a very it can be a very life or death thing. And I think that when you're selling, the more that you're able to get in touch with the emotional state of the buyer, the more successful you'll be, but probably the more helpful you're going to be.
Agreed. And then with that being the case, though, because one of the things that you mentioned earlier was about leadership and how the military prepared you for that, for as a business owner or even a real estate investor, any type of business owner in this particular day and age, you're not doing it solo. There is a team involved, mm-hmm. and one of the most important quote unquote sales jobs you will ever do is that to your team and getting them to be enrolled in the vision and committed to actually executing the vision in such a way that, like what you say, if we're not well led, we insist on taking charge. I agree. But at the same time, I think we've also learned a certain level of this is how you follow properly as well, that we expect from those that work with us, either our customers or as well as our internal teammates. I'm just kind of curious of your thoughts on what would someone be able to do to become the leader necessary to get their team to help them execute the vision of the company.
Well, and that's one of the main jobs of the boss is the vision. People will work very effectively. I think you need to treat them with a lot of respect, and it's just like again back to the military. There's a great book out, a new book by Simon Sinek, the author of
Leaders Eat Last. Is that where you're
going? and his book, the first time I'd heard of it, he said it was called Leaders Eat Last, and I already knew what the book was about, because in the military you do not eat until every one of your soldiers has been fed well and is taken care of, and so you could characterize it as servant leadership. But I think people need strong leadership. They need to sense that they understand where the organization's going and how they fit in, and they need consistent leadership. If you find, I've often heard that, and I've seen it come true, that it's not the employees you fire, it's the ones you don't fire that can be a problem. In other words, like the Jack Welch, where he would push out the low performers each year, and everybody knew this, and they went on to find better jobs. But I think that morale is obviously very important. Not sure if that answered your question, but
no, that's absolutely perfect, because at the end of the day, what can happen, at least I've seen this happen, is where the new entrepreneur gets so concerned about how much money they're going to make, they forget about all the other people in the team, and then it becomes difficult to negotiate a win-win situation, because they get self-concerned. When if you take care of your people, I was taught, the phrase that I was taught, if you build the people will build the business. And that has served me well, to say the least.
Yeah, the culture is very important, and creating a scalable business that you're able to show how you can get additional uh, and grow the business is very important. But it kind of takes me back to Jack Welch. I remember an interview I heard him talk about. He was the head of GE for many, many years, and he said that he spent 90% of his time fielding teams. He said he just fielded teams. That was the main focus. In other words, getting the right people in the right positions and
Right.
making sure they were properly directed.
I, as we grow, I can see why he would say that. Because once you have a player playing out of position, everybody has a problem, and
Hmm.
it becomes a very enormous challenge to fix it or find a new position, because they could be a good player, they're just playing the wrong position, and sometimes you got to create a new position that you didn't even know you needed just to keep them. But that's
Yeah.
definitely interesting. Now, you've mentioned it a couple of times, so I'm now very curious. What you say, invest a lot of time in talking people out of wasting money. So, let's pretend for a second we're the brand new entrepreneur that you're talking to. We've got an idea. We think our business rocks. We want to grow. Okay.
Hmm.
And what are the top three things you see people do first that are absolutely wrong?
Well, um, your listeners may appreciate this. First, you have to put them in one and two buckets. Do they have funding or do they not have funding? If they have funding, they'll tend to want to waste more money.
I love that. If they have money, they want to waste more of it.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. They think
okay.
well, and not only that, but let's say they're venture backed. Then those people are saying, "Well, go market yourself," and there's not always a clear understanding of what they should be doing. What they'll want to do is, I liken it to maybe 100 years ago, where there had been the horse and buggy era, and it had been a lot of very successful people, and it worked well. And along came some people who were in this car business. And I can imagine them talking to the horse and buggy folks saying, you really ought to be checking out this internal combustion engine, these automobiles. We really think it's going to be big. It's going to be big. And now the horse and buggy people are sort of saying, well, we've been very successful with the horse and buggy thing. And horse and buggies are never going to go away. And besides, the roads aren't even paved. Look at your vehicle. It's always stuck in the mud. And I think that there's a similar attitude now where people look back the last 75 years and they see how marketing happened. And the way marketing happened for the most part was it was interruptive. So, in other words, you would interrupt someone while they were doing something that was interesting to them, such as interrupting a radio show, interrupting the magazine they were reading, television commercials, direct mail. You'd get into their mail stream there. You could do cold calling for a long, long time, just interrupting people. We all are familiar with people who kept getting phone calls during dinner hour. And finally, there was legislation. And then you could even interrupt people with email, where you could buy thousands of email addresses and just spam them like crazy. And now even that's against the law, and not only that, it's very, very bad for your ability to send real emails. So what's happening now is there's still a tendency to want to go and write a check and send a bunch of people to a trade show without a lot of preparation, run a bunch of ads if they can find places to run the ads, print up a lot of direct mail, half of which ends up in the landfills now. About 44%, I think, by one study, they don't even get open. So instead, and so you see how that there's that muscle memory in the part of the business world to want to go and do these sort of outbound interruptive marketing tactics. When in fact, because of the technology and the internet, like I talked about earlier, the way people buy has fundamentally changed. And it's a fundamental change, sort of like the way the world changed after the printing press was invented 500 something years ago. It just brought on all kinds of change and disruption. So now the customer is completely in control. They can tune out a lot of unwanted marketing messages. They can tune out other kinds of content. and they want to research and get the information before they go off and start to engage with the seller. So remember when I talked about earlier, the best thing you could do is to start a blog, and really a blog is it's a type of web page, but you can have a website, but if you're doing it right and you're publishing information that's very useful to your target audience, your prospective customers, most of your traffic is going to come through the blog, because you're going to be writing about solutions to problems, and then they're going to come to your site and say, "Oh, wow, this is really helpful. Who is this guy?" and then you take the relationship further there. You get them to download something and capture their email address, and you can start emailing them information that they've elected to get. So I think that now companies need to start out with thinking about who their prospective customer is, who their prospective buyer is, and what is it that they're interested in, and what kind of content can you create online, and then use social media to get it out there to draw them in. So in other words, now you have to be really useful or entertaining or interesting to get people's attention. You can't, it's much harder to interrupt them. So do you see how I'm sort of explaining, I spend a fair amount of time explaining how things have changed. And oftentimes when I do that, when I'm talking to groups or whatever, they'll all say, "Yeah, you know what, that's how I buy." And so they'll say, "Wow, yeah, I guess that's true. And matter of fact, none of our salespeople can get through anymore." Oh, yeah, wow. I didn't think it applied to my business, but it's certainly the way that I, consume media and buy now. So, I'm trying to explain to companies that the priorities have shifted. It's sort of like, again, going back in history, I can imagine those guys like Copernicus or Galileo 500 years ago trying to explain that the world, the sun actually doesn't rotate around the earth rotates around the sun, where you're sort of explaining that there's been this fundamental change, and that now success in marketing has less to do with the size of your budget and more to do with the size of your brain. What kind of thought leadership and content can you produce on a website to and then use all the other bits of that marketing solar system to pull people towards you. So it's like in the past, here's a visual for you. There was a bullhorn where you could shout at people and tell them what to do, which was great, frankly. I mean, I loved it, but it no longer works. Now your business your marketing has to be like a great big powerful magnet pulling people toward you.
Nice. Now, there's a phrase that I started using a few years ago. I was like, you educate to dominate. He or she who educates the market dominates that market. And one of the things that I like about what you're saying is what used to be driven by a pocketbook is now driven, just by, as you said, by time. So if you're willing, what I hear is, we can take one resource instead of converting, investing a significant amount of upfront cash. What we need to invest is an upfront intellectual capital in publishing that in various forms to find the people who resonate with it, and then give them an opportunity to participate with us in some way. That's literally what I feel like I'm hearing from you.
Yeah, that's a good description, and it's real important that there's a lot of for me to get tactical and practical here. There are a lot of companies that want to use social media, but you've got to base everything on your own site that you own, like, with your own URL, because you own that. That's never going to change. There are companies out there that try to market their business through Facebook, for instance. I'm not attacking Facebook, and now, like a company page where the company spent a lot of time and effort and money trying to get people to like their page so they could communicate with them through Facebook. Mm-hmm. Now, Facebook is only showing about 1% to 2% of your messages on your Facebook page to your fans.
Wow.
So now, why are they doing that? They want you to pay them to show it to them. So there's kind of so as a result, what you want to avoid with social media is don't build on rented land. All these social media platforms come and go and they change. You want to make sure that you're always driving pay people back to your site.
Well, you realize that's also true for real estate. We don't like to build on rented land. I want to own the land when I
Exactly. So your audience is really going to get that. But that's an expression that people, seem to understand. And I guess the other relationship between this content that you need to publish and the the social media is, in the words of Jay Baer, the marketing author, content is fire, social media is gasoline. Social media is great for spreading your message and getting your helpful, useful content out there, but don't invest a lot of time and money in your social media if you don't have some sort of content strategy. And the other thing that is very, very different now from in the past is that in the past, when you wanted to market your business, a lot of it was writing a check and you were renting eyeballs, or you were renting people passing by your trade show booth, or whatever. In other words, just like with Google AdWords, those ads will come up as long as you're paying the money. But the minute you're not paying the money, it goes away. With this content that you produce that is on your company website, you own that. And that's it's like making a deposit in a savings account, because over time, more and more people start discovering it, and it comes up in the organic searches, and you own it. You will get leads from blog posts you've written 4 years from now, or 4 years ago. So in other words, this is the first time where people are in a widespread way owning their own marketing assets instead of renting their marketing assets. And I think that's something that your audience probably appreciates.
Yeah, well, I love to charge renters money. I don't want to be the renter all the time, unless it absolutely makes sense. And one of the interesting things that I don't even know, I just recently ran into Jay Baer in FusionCon just a few weeks ago.
Great.
So I was just, his book was Utility, I believe.
Yes, excellent book, and I recommend it to all of your listeners. And it talks about how, like what you said earlier, now, based on what I've said and what he says even much more articulately in his book, the more helpful you are, the more you're going to sell, the more useful you can be. So if let's say you have a company that is make it up, let's say you're a roofer, or you're a pool company, or you're a accountant, and you have blog on your website, and you are publishing articles that are basically answers to the top 25 questions you ever get, and the ones that you get over and over again, you will educate your prospective customers. They will appreciate it. They tend to want to hire people that have helped them and have demonstrated their expertise. By the way, when you have educated your prospective customers, not all of them are going to come to you, but you're going to get the phone ringing. And your closings in many industries, your conversions start to increase because you've already educated these people. By the time you meet with them, you're basically taking the order. The less time you can spend educating them, the better. I'll give you an example of another entrepreneur, Marcus Sheridan, who is he still has a pool company here in Virginia. And around 2008, he was, nobody's buying real estate. They're definitely not buying pools. Somebody had embezzled money from them. In the IRS, they were in problems there, and so they were buying hundreds of thousands of dollars of advertising in D.C. and Richmond, in Virginia area. And they were about at their wits' end. They didn't know what they were going to do. So he said, there's nothing else I can do. I don't have a whole lot of cash left. I'm going to start blogging. And sure enough, he started blogging, and all he did was write articles that answered every question he'd ever gotten as a pool company owner. Like, what's the difference between a vinyl and concrete? what does a pool cost? What should I look for when I'm buying a pool? What are the ways that people get ripped off buying pools? And within a short amount of time, he had like the #1 pool site in the country, higher than the manufacturers. And it surged. The traffic surged. He was being helpful. He was being useful. And by the way, he wrote the foreword to Jay Baer's book, Utility. And so then now he's become a marketing consultant where he's going around showing people how to do the same thing. He's still one of the owners. And I've had the pleasure and honor of meeting both of these guys, and their stories are so illustrative. What's interesting to me about Marcus is that they ultimately got so good at getting phone calls from people saying, hey, we've checked out your site, you've answered all our questions, we really feel like we know how to buy a pool, because it's kind of something you only have to get up to speed on once, really. And can you come out and see us? And they would say, yes. Now, we're going to send you, we'll schedule the appointment, and we're going to send you this ebook. It's not a long one, but it's a book that you really need to read, to everything that you would probably need to know about buying a pool. And we're going to call you back the day before the appointment, and if you haven't had a chance to read the book, that's fine. We'll just reschedule. And it helped them, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, they started closing at 85%.
Wow.
In other words, 85% of the visits to the home, they were closing. And first off, they were weeding out people that weren't serious. And they got out to the home and they spent more time closing the sale instead of spending 4 to 6 hours educating one at a time what you need to know about a pool.
Right.
So that's where they were using this content to educate and inform and build trust, and it worked beautifully. So yeah, that's a great book. There's a number of great ones out there. Utility is a really, really good one to read. Relatively new too.
Excellent. So when someone comes to you, we wanted to get more information about how you could help us in our own B2B strategies, because some of us, for example, with my commercial side of real estate, that's nothing but B2B because it's me housing more businesses. And we're also building a hotel right now. So all of those things become very relevant. And I want everyone to understand is that just because it's B2B, that doesn't mean the same strategy doesn't work B2C if you're working in the residential real estate space. Mm-hmm. The principles are the same, and at the end of the day, educate to dominate. What's changing is that, and this is the part that I was like, you said 57% of that research is being done online, and part of what we're starting to see and what changed things for me is I would show up somewhere and someone who I knew, or at least thought I knew, told me that they were looking me up online. I'm like, what are you seeing? I don't even know what's there. And I was like, well, if you're going to look it up, I might as well put something there so you can find it.
Nature abhors a vacuum. And if you are not filling that vacuum, putting information out there, somebody else will.
Yeah. And that's it. And it's been a very interesting thing because the power of the internet allows us to reach all of you guys out there in the UK and Germany who are listening. All of you guys that are not in the U.S. I know, there's a number of you out there in Canada that are also listening. And for some reason, you guys in the Philippines are also listening. And I'm glad that, we're helping in various different ways to help you learn the tools and techniques and strategies to go out there and build cash flow. So before we end, I would love to know a couple of things. One, how can we, get in touch with you? And then secondly, what would you have to say for that person who's starting out today? Maybe they're feeling like, like you were when he said, what do you want to market? You're like, I don't know. What are those steps that what would you have to have them do? What are those steps that they can take, and how can we find more of you, sir?
Well, to reach me, they can go to my website, which is artillerymarketing.com. Otherwise, I'm on LinkedIn. Name is Douglas Burdett, Burdett. I think that for the people that are, let me just say that the scariest part of going off and becoming an entrepreneur for me was finally making that decision. And once I made the decision, I everything else fell into place. It was just it was like taking that first leap, really. I think that, where I said I don't know what I want to do, I think that, and I learned this at a young age, the more that you can find something that interests you, the more successful you're going to be. Now, if you can find a niche, you will get that much farther along successfully faster. So if there's something that excites your folks, your listeners, I would urge them to don't ignore it. And there's also I think there was a book that I looked at years ago, and I know it's still around, called "What Color Is Your Parachute?" Have you heard of that book?
What color? No, I was like, you caught me in the process of going, what color? I was thinking to myself, I'm like, okay, I'm taking notes again.
Well, check out, because a lot of friends come to me and they say, hey, I'm going to make a big change. And I'm like, oh boy, I can really feel for them, because it's terrifying. But once you break through, What Color Is Your Parachute is a book. I think it's now a website where it helps you determine what your true interests might be, not what you think you're supposed to be doing. In other words, like, I thought I was supposed to be an Army officer, but it turned out this was my real interest, my real passion. And this thing, I remember doing it, when I was going through that process of going from the military to the business world, of looking at it and finding it very helpful. So I think that those things that I've described are very simple, but they are in fact the hardest part, is deciding to make the jump and finding what interests you.
Yeah, I can only agree and underscore that much more. It's very, very true. It's one thing to be told what you're supposed to do. It's another to say, hey, I have my freedom. Let me go exercise it fully and choose my own path, and then make that work. It's a whole new thing. Well, I definitely appreciate the time that you've invested here with us. Hopefully, in the not too distant future, if we can, we'll be able to produce a return for you. And again, thanks for your prior service, your family's service, and all the things that you're doing out there to help entrepreneurs go out there and become bigger, better, badder business owners, and give those products and services to all of their customers, and reach the person that they know how to help.
Well, my pleasure. I hope it was helpful.
All right, guys. Now you know what it's time to do. It is time for you to move at the speed of instruction. There were a number of resources that were given to you today. Obviously, you want to go over to artillerymarketing.com, because that's going to be important for you. But we've got the books, the Ogilvy in Advertising. Hopefully, that was one of the first books that was mentioned, right? We also have the Jay Baer's book, Utility, and that's Y-O-Utility is how that one actually breaks out. And then What Color Is Your Parachute? It almost sounds like a children's book, but at either way it goes, these are all steps that you now know that you can go take to begin your steps into journey. And remember, it's not about the money, because that's, if you've learned nothing today, you've learned that it's not about dumping a whole bunch of cash onto the problem, but definitely using your brain. And that's a resource all of you have. So I'm excited to continue talking with you guys and bringing more and more information that helps you as well as myself, so that we can go out there and become the investors that we know we already are. I look forward to talking to you guys soon. Until next time.
Thank you for investing your time with Jay Massey and the Cash Flow Diary. When you have a moment, please visit iTunes and leave a positive comment about the show. And go now to our website, cashflowdiary.com, to take advantage of our free business building course, Cash Flow Foundation. Gain the knowledge, understanding, and skill that will teach you how to never need a job again. Until next time.